Xiaochen rushed to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for unknown reasons, and as soon as Ivy saw him, she said, "Lend me your cell phone for a while." Although Xiaochen had been on Ivy's guard for the past few days, Ivy had behaved well, had done nothing, and had been more cooperative in her attitude. It was only the matter of asking him for his means of communication that professional sensitivities froze him for a moment. Ivy warmly and softly explained to Xiaochen, "I am calling your Chief Gu." Chief Gu is her father. John. Ivy, though imprisoned by her mother, Rose, was perfectly justified in calling her father, a legitimate and reasonable request. After thinking clearly, Xiaochen then took the cell phone to Ivy. Ivy also sighed in her heart when she got the phone. Her mother really did things in a tricky way. She gave her a cell phone that didn't even have her father's contact information in it. She found John in her address book and dialed the number, which was quickly picked up. The father's voice came from over there. "Xiaochen, what's the matter?" Ivy cleared her throat. "Dad, it's me." John was surprised and amused, and asked his daughter, with concern, if she had been well for the past few days. Many of Rose's practices he does not agree with, but Rose is strong. If he refutes Rose's face in front of his daughter, Rose does not know how long she will be angry. This time, he really does not have the means to go head-to-head with Rose. "I'm fine," Ivy said, but she was already choking. "Where would you not be aggrieved? Where would you not be sad, Dad? I want to go to him." He means Michael. She wasn't sure about her father's attitude toward Michael, but she was certain that John wasn't at least as vehement toward Michael as Rose was. Including those disputes between her and Amelia, John, as a father, has always maintained a neutral stance. John didn't say a word. Ivy re-emphasized that he's on maneuvers in Sunnyside right now, and I'd like to go find him. And John, of course, knew that Michael was maneuvering. The exercise was very large, not something to be joked about. Both military districts were involved. And the commanders of several military districts were there. He lapsed into a long silence. Remembering his own youth and after John and Rose met, even though Rose was from a good family, she was surprisingly arrogant and ill-tempered, and then his family introduced him to a more suitable girl, but he was determined to be with Rose. Then came the stormy decades, and although there were quarrels, they had a pretty good time, and loved and trusted each other. Whereas many of the brothers who grew up in the compound with John in those days had unfortunate marriages. How hard it must be for people like them to find someone suitable and agreeable to them. Michael, that young man is really excellent, will be a tiger, with a little Confucian general breath, rare Ivy, and put aside all the past, John is actually very optimistic about his youngest daughter and Michael. John was getting into middle age, his temper was easing, and it had been many years since he had quarreled with Rose. But this time, for the sake of his little daughter, he might have to have a great conflict with his wife, who had been with him for many years. John remained silent, and Ivy's heart was pounding nervously, fearing that her father would also give her a death sentence for her feelings, and then have John watch over her even more closely. My father's voice sounded again. Ivy's heart beat violently with that voice. "Michael, that exercise is very important. Don't bother him when you get there. I'll arrange for someone to pick you up over there." Ivy was so flattered that she didn't care that her father wasn't by her side and wasn't able to see her movements at the moment, and hurriedly waved her hand to refuse. No, Dad, I'll go there by myself, and you don't need to send someone to pick me up over there. Just tell me the time when he's finished with his maneuvers, and I'll give him a call when he's done with his maneuvers." Ivy didn't want to make too big a deal out of it. It seemed a bit unreasonable to have to bother someone else for something so trivial. This time John did not agree, but also did not give his daughter too much pressure. He originally wanted Ivy over there as soon as he landed to let people to pick up, but this moment can only change the idea. "So, I'll give you a phone call in a while. You arrive in G County, call this phone. He will give you arrangements. When the exercise is over, cannot say. Our real guns, unpredictable, can only first wait." Your mother sighed. "When she came back, I'll talk to her." The corners of Ivy's mouth curved upwards. "Thanks, Dad. You take the cell phone to Chan," John said. Ivy was busy handing her cell phone to Xiaochen. I don't know what John said to Xiaochen. Xiaochen's expression was so exaggerated that it made people want to laugh. Xiaochen gave Ivy the bank card that John had asked him to keep, as John had instructed him to do, and sent Ivy to the airport again. Rose do things well thought out. Long ago Ivy's ID card received. Good thing that the airport side can open a temporary identification. Ivy soon boarded the plane. Sunnyside and Washington are in the same northern part of the country, and while Sunnyside is economically backward, it's not very far from Washington. An hour or so later, the plane arrived at the provincial capital of Sunshine City. Ivy changed trains again, and sat on the hard seat of the green train, rattling all the way for 7 or 8 hours before arriving at G Autonomous County. The sky has been completely dark. G County in the Motherlands due north has been considered a frontier. G County sparsely populated, economically backward. The station is also a small one, built on the very edge of the county. Out of the train station, you can be in the black sky, can be seen vaguely sprawling grasslands and deserts. The air was dry, and Ivy felt the skin on her face tense up, and she looked at the time, a little after 9 p.m. It was better not to bother anyone at this late hour, and Ivy thought of contacting the man her father had arranged for tomorrow. She took a regular cab in the small square in front of the station. The hotel was just booked on her cell phone, and asked the driver to take her to the hotel. This county is really small, there are no chain hotels, and you can only book small hotels run by locals. As the car sped along the desert grassland trails, the landscape was different from Washington's. A group of people in training uniforms suddenly appeared under the wide canopy, and Ivy stared at the group for a few moments, and the driver smiled and explained to Ivy, "Our small place, few people, like you to travel, even fewer people, not a few days a year, the most lively is this time of the year, the troops come every year to exercise it, although most of the time we cannot see. But the desert does not distinguish between the day and night." Came the sound of the rumbling, but also. "Interesting," the driver said. "I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to see you. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to see you." While the driver was talking and giggling, Ivy was lost in thought. After a while, Ivy suddenly voiced out, "Master, please drive the car back to where that group of warriors was just now." The driver's head shook like a rattlesnake. "Every year before the military exercises, the local government will give them a message, encounter the military exercises of the officers and soldiers cannot interfere with people. No. They're here for maneuvers. We're not even allowed to go near them. I'm not here to make trouble, I'm here to find my boyfriend." Ivy was about to cry, and just now, between their talking, the car had already driven out a kilometer or two. Let her run over there now, whether she could run or not. Not to say, that group of people is not necessarily there, driving is faster after all. The driver looked at the little girl's expression was really pitiful. Before he used a negotiating tone and said to Ivy, "Then I can only send you to the side of them all. I can't get too close to the." Ivy hastily responded, Yes, thank you so much, I really appreciate it. That master is an old driver, here is full of uninhabited desert, he a meal operation like a tiger, it does not take a few minutes to kill back." The Ivy handed the driver a $100 bill, opened the door and jumped out, running towards the group of people. That in the darkness of the night, the warriors saw a dark figure running towards them, swish and stern. Fearing that it was a local villager, they did not make the next move. It is not that they have not encountered such a situation when they maneuvered. The local villagers in the grassland grazing sheep do not know what happened, that sheep and people hooting and hollering all barged into the boundaries of their maneuvers to come. They have no choice but to communicate with people well, so that people hurry to go. This external factors inadvertently increase the difficulty of their maneuvers, so that they are both good and laughable. The Ivy, seeing them with their guns at their sides, hastened to exclaim, "My name is Ivy, and I'm looking for Michael, the chief of staff of the 60132 ND." She'd heard that the exercise was big and crowded, and she wasn't sure if people knew about Michael. When Ivy said this, the men with the guns were all baffled. "You looked at me, I looked at you, and looked at each other for a long time, and one of them called out, 'Go and inform the chief of staff.'" What kind of fairy was this woman, who had come out of nowhere to find Michael, one of the several leading commanders of the Blues, their nemesis in the Reds? A soldier contacted Christopher on his walkie-talkie to give a report to Christopher, the Red Army combat commander, chief of staff. "We've got a woman on our side who says she's looking for Michael." Christopher frowned slightly. This was a rare thing. What was the woman's relationship with Michael? That Michael hadn't had any other girlfriends since he'd split up with that girl, and on a normal day, Christopher would have laughed his ass off to hear rumors that Michael had gotten involved with any girl again. "I don't know. She said her name was Ivy." The hint of a smile froze on Christopher's lips. The Ivy. Ivy, the name, it seemed like he'd heard it somewhere before. Christopher suddenly slapped his thigh. Isn't this the girl that Michael couldn't stop thinking about when he and Michael were in military school together? That girl even came to their school to see Michael, and it was in order to rush to pick up this girl that Michael lost to him in target shooting. Then I don't know what happened with the girl and Michael. He never waited for good news from Michael. Christopher just heard rumors that Michael and his girlfriend broke up, and then later on, Michael went out on missions without even caring about his life, and often heard the news from Washington that he'd been decorated and wounded again, and that the girl had left, and that Michael hadn't even cared about his life anymore. A group of commanders in the Red Army Command were frozen for a moment by Christopher's agitated movements. Christopher didn't care, he just shouted into the end of the walkie-talkie, "Detain the man, send him over to the logistics department, treat him well." Christopher and Michael are college classmates. The military academy is full of excellent people, high school grades are the top, even if there is some relationship. Come in the second generation of the third generation because of the relationship between the elders from childhood. Words and teachings are not worse. Christopher and Michael were the top of the top in their class, and both were chess rivals in every subject, every bout, every competition. When they were in school, two fine men, at once sympathetic and at every turn opposed to each other. So Christopher and Michael have a relationship that is both very good friends from school and secretly competitive at every turn. Michael had only lost to him once so far, and that was the one time Michael had rushed to pick up Ivy. But Christopher knew too well in his heart, where Michael had lost. It was clear that he was afraid that the girl had waited too long to compete with him again, and perfunctorily after graduation, Michael was assigned back to the military district in Washington, D.C., while he went back to work for the Army in his hometown on the east side of the country. This large-scale maneuver is a sort of another match between the two after a long gap, and Christopher is taking it very seriously, and this time he has to win. The maneuvers have been going on for 5 full days, and the Reds and Blues are evenly matched, and have reached a stalemate that makes for the most intolerable. The forces on both sides were so strong that none of them knew how long it would take to end the maneuver. Christopher contacted Blues Command and got Michael on the line. "What's the matter?" Michael's cool voice came from over there, and the two men were friendly in private. But they were real rivals on the drill ground, and besides, Michael was so busy laying out a new battle plan that he wasn't in the mood to nag Christopher at the moment. Christopher, like Michael, is a man of few harsh words, only put things in a simple and clear way. "Your ex-girlfriend is here with me, I'll take care of it for you first. When the maneuvers are over, I'll send her over to you." Michael's eyebrows jumped. Ex-girlfriends? What other ex-girlfriends does he have? July came here. His mind was troubled and worried for a moment as to how July had escaped from Rose's confinement, and how she had come to be there, and whether she had encountered any danger on the way. But the thought that she had arrived safe and sound removed a little of the worry from his mind, and now Christopher gave him these really do not have good intentions. The surface said that the first look after the watch. In fact, people are in his place. Michael can still let go to continue to maneuver even though he knew Ivy was safe on Christopher's side. Michael just couldn't let her go. It's this mentality of Michael's that Christopher has captured, his impatience, like that time in college when the two of them were shooting at targets, and as soon as Ivy arrived, Michael had to wait to see. "Just you wait," Michael said, through gritted teeth. A few words. Michael's side hung up. Christopher turned around and went to discuss the new battle plan with a couple of other Red Army commanders. Christopher could almost foresee that in the coming days, Michael would be picking up the pace, planning to take them Reds by the scruff of the neck, so that he would have a chance to set an ambush on the Blues, and thus gain the ultimate victory. In the general command post of the exercise, several Army commanders and commanders, as well as some other high-ranking officers of the Army, were watching the progress of the exercise on the screen. The Red Army and the Blue Army had reached the phase of holding. The Blue Army could not attack the Red Army's fortress for a long time, and the Red Army did not have the means to break through the Blue Army's defense line, either. The battle was stalemated, and several of the old generals looked on with furrowed brows, and Michael's father, Thomas, and Christopher's father, William, were on hand to keep a close eye on their son's maneuvering battlefield, which is a battlefield, and how is it not a contest in the general headquarters? The William's mouth said that Thomas was a tiger's father, and that Thomas was blessed to have such a capable son. Yet in his heart he felt that his own son, Christopher, was a better man than Michael. Thomas also thinks, this son of William is not bad, and his own son that is really equal in strength. His own son will have to beat that Christopher boy down this time, and split the difference between a winner and a loser. Several other commanders looked at the blue dots and red dots that kept moving on the screen, and also praised in front of the two of them, these two children, both of them are remarkable. The future is boundless yet the situation at hand has changed dramatically in a single day originally, and the Red Army stalemate of the Blue Army suddenly radicalized. Many teams several times risk trying to break out and sneak attack, but repeatedly hit the Red Army ambush. Thomas looked at the big screen and just about pounded his chest, and wondered what was wrong with that brat Michael, who was suddenly so adventurous. And a few days down the road, Michael's Blue Army lost in a row. Thomas could not sit still at the exercise headquarters. His eyes no longer look at the screen, only there, angry, holding tea as an antidote to pour. And 4 days later, at 8 o'clock in the morning, a group of people just walked into the general headquarters of the exercise, looked at the screen, and immediately realized that there seemed to be something wrong. Thomas was the first to react to the fact that the large red dot representing the Red Army Combat Command was gone from the screen. The William saw it, too, and he couldn't believe it, thinking he must be getting old, staring at the screen every day and getting bleary-eyed. The loss of an operational command is equivalent to the annihilation of an entire army. While this was going on, a little warrior came running up, conveying the message that the Blue Army blew up the Red Army's command center, captured Red Army Commander Christopher and others alive, and wiped out the Red Army. The drill is over. The little warrior was so mid-sentence that he roared so loud it hurt William's eardrums. With the Red Army's command blown up, the army wiped out, and his son captured alive, William is dumbfounded. The plot just reversed itself. Michael had Christopher, who was tied up, and the other commanders of the Red Army get into the military pickup, and he himself got in and sat on the passenger side, and had it driven toward the general headquarters of the exercise. Christopher yells from the back of the car, "Michael, the maneuver is over, you can't do this to me." The Michael did not say anything, his originally handsome face cannot see the former half of the face, only was smeared by the oil color black and green piece after piece, only that slightly hooked up the corners of the mouth, indicating that he is now in the mood for pleasure. He cannot wait to see the girl, feeds this desire to make quick work of Michael that Christopher captures, frequently setting up ambushes for his team, but Michael quickly reacts, and in turn captures Christopher's belief that he's bound to fall for it, having first sacrificed a small portion of his party to make Christopher think he had been tricked and let his guard down, and then having made a surprise attack on the Red Army's command during the night with his best officers and men over 2 mountains, and having captured alive the Red Army's cadre of commanders, headed by Christopher. The Michael thought that Christopher had the audacity to threaten himself with Ivy, and in one fell swoop, he blew up the entire command. Michael didn't give a damn what Christopher was feeling right now. He took a group of men, escorted the commanders of the Red Army to the general headquarters of the maneuvers, reported on the maneuvers, and then threw down the word that there was something else to be done, and left. Christopher stayed behind and was grilled by the bigwigs about the details of the maneuvers, and only when he couldn't carry on at the back of the room did he tell the truth about that it wasn't a violation for him to do this. After all, it was just a phone call to Michael. Just William is still angry, straight jumping feet, pointing at Christopher's nose, scolding, "You know Michael cares about that girl, but also for people to take care of. Take care of people can rest assured that people did not give you together with the bombing, is considered to be good." The Thomas was also listening to the side of the tears, but the girl was Ivy. He was quite shocked, around and around for so many years, these two children or come together. The Ivy had half a clue what was going on out there. She was led to a canteen, where the soldier told her that this was the logistics department of their Red Army, and even put her in touch with the man John had originally arranged to pick her up, so that the man could give her father's side of the story. She's in a little boarding house every day, and she's fed and allowed to walk around. Ivy didn't think much of it, thinking that this was the land of maneuvers, and that it was normal to not be able to run around without a signal. She eats and sleeps and eats, and is in the best of minds. Michael was on maneuvers, and she was afraid of disturbing him, so she didn't try to contact him, thinking that since Michael already knew she was coming over, he'd surely come looking for her when the maneuvers were over. That morning, as soon as Ivy got up, she saw that the little warriors in the cooking class were all bitter, and she asked what happened. and the little warrior wouldn't say. Knowing that these were confidential, Ivy asked no further questions, and she found a small dune nearby and sat down, and began to look at the scenery. The sun was rising, the sun was a little harsh, the desert was endless. She remembered the verses she had learned as a child. The desert is deserted. The sun sets over the long river. The yellow sand wears gold armor in 100 battles, and we will not return until we have broken Lulan. Suddenly she saw dust rising in the distance, and the yellow sand seemed to be moving in the sky, and in the middle of that yellow sand there was an army green vehicle, speeding. She was getting a little bored staying here, and watched as the car began to time itself, and by the time it had counted to 50 seconds or so, it had come from far to near, and stopped just below the little dune she was sitting on. The driver's door opened, and the first thing Ivy saw was a pair of long legs, wearing camouflage pants. That the man came out in one piece, his military uniform straight, his face still painted with some dark green and deep black oil, standing under the sunrise of the desert, as if there was light on his body. Ivy couldn't care less about anything. She threw the sand she had just grabbed in her hand into the air and immediately ran down the dune. She rushed into Michael's arms, feeling only the hardness of that chest, unique to him. Michael, Ivy called his name out loud. Michael excitedly picked her up, lifted her into midair and spun her around several times, then set her down again, kissed her gently on the cheek, ran out of the. She nodded, aggression coming up like a tidal wave. My mom locked me up, my dad helped me escape. Michael had learned from Olivia that Ivy had been locked up by her mother and cut off from all contact with the outside world. Michael knew that it would be very difficult for them to get past Rose, but he didn't expect Rose to take such drastic measures. That night, he went to Rose, who was shaken up, but with little change in attitude. It was then that Michael understood Rose's attitude toward herself, being so shunned, and yet the girl had come to him, against all odds. It's an airplane ride, then a 7 or 8 hour train ride from Washington, D.C. to here. There's nothing here but desert, and nothing but grass, and nothing but desert, and few people, and I don't know if she'll feel aggrieved to come here from prosperous Washington, and if she'll meet any danger on the way. Michael frowned subconsciously and looking at Ivy's stubborn and aggravated face under the sunrise, Michael's heart ached. The drill is over, let's go home. Back to their home, not the one her mother dictated to her. Michael's words were quite a bit of a dismissal. Ivy listened to his words and thought of those crying little cookshop fighters just now, and couldn't help but be shocked. You lost, the otherwise, early in the morning. What was the meaning of their people putting on that look? Thinking about it, there was only one possibility. Michael stretched out his fingers, dotingly scraped the bridge of Ivy's upturned nose, and said somewhat helplessly, you don't believe in my strength so much. Our army won greatly, he said. Ivy wasn't doubting Michael's strength, she was just afraid that he was just teasing her, and she turned her head, pointing to the cookbook warriors who were watching them from a distance, but they looked pretty unhappy early in the morning, like they'd lost a battle. Michael smiling. They've lost the war. Don't worry about them. Let's go. Ivy was being dragged to the car by Michael, the whole thing still baffled as to what he meant. Michael explained to her as he backed up the car, you fool, captured and used as a hostage, and you don't even know it. Ivy looked at Michael, wide-eyed and confused. You've been in the Red Army's logistics department. I'm in the Blue Army. Someone setting me up with you. Ivy listened to the whole thing in a cloud, but it was like she realized what was going on. Dare I say that she had given away a trick by reporting herself when she saw that team the other day. She's only just escaped from Rose, and she's been locked up again by Michael's rival. Thinking about it that way, Ivy felt like a real fool, and there weren't many cars on Gobi Beach, and Ivy took the opportunity to reach over and rub her face against him. And what about you? Have you been threatened by the? Michael thought for a moment, and replied, earnestly, yes. He was in command when he got the call from Christopher, never realizing that Christopher had given him such a story. The veins on his temples popped and popped as he listened to Theets. Just that Michael knows Christopher's character and believes in the rules of the Force, that Christopher wouldn't do anything to get what he wants, and that the rules of the Force don't allow for such infractions. So the only effect that Ivy's being held back by Christopher has had is to speed up the maneuvers, and he's got to make quick work of them and finish them to get to her. Thief Ivy hadn't come. There was no telling how long he and Christopher would have been stuck like this. Michael and Ivy went back to Washington, D.C., the same day. Ivy's ticket was at noon, and Michael drove Ivy to the airport first and returned to the county himself to board the plane back to Washington, D. with the main group, Christopher on the transporter before, but also joked with Michael, Michael, you and his little girlfriend when you get married don't forget to send me invitations. Lost is lost, but Christopher lost to convince, the next day will be long. He always had the opportunity to fight with Michael again, though over at the Washington airport, my father John had his guard, Chin, pick up Ivy. And the destination was, naturally, Ivy's house in the compound. Ivy knew that Rose had returned, and before she went home prepared herself mentally for Rose's stormy welcome, yet Rose just sat there with a demure, pretty face, and gave her a box half a dozen times, and see for yourself if there's anything missing. The Ivy didn't move, and John urged her to open it up and take a look at it, to see if everything was still all right. Only then did Ivy open it up, and her cell phone, ID, bank card, and a few other things were in there. These were all things Rose had put away earlier, and Ivy didn't understand what she meant by. Rose also said, Xiaochen has Xiaochen's business, cannot watch you every day, you will go to commute by yourself, your apartment, close to the ministry, usually do not want to come back to live over there. That being said, Rose turned and went upstairs, leaving Ivy and John both in the parlor. The John sighed. And Rose's heart was intent, but in the end she took a step back, and John said to Ivy, this weekend, ask Michael if he has time to come home for dinner together. On your sister's side, John is very difficult. A few days ago, Amelia also do not know where to listen to the news of Michael and Ivy together again. Also know that Ivy this time by the mother locked up and escape and Michael have something to do with, and so began to make a fuss again, the past few days. She directly do not eat or drink, and now directly sick, in the upstairs bedroom lying down. All do not come down, your sister has a small heart, but she's your sister, so don't irritate her. John has no choice but to do this. Ivy nodded and said yes. On Saturday, Ivy and Michael were back at Ivy's house together, and Rose still looked detached, but she had personally arranged flowers in a vase at home early in the morning. John watched his wife's movements, and dropped his heart slightly. Oh, Rose, still hard-mouthed and soft-hearted, the Amelia had been egged on by John to go out with a couple of her fellow writers. So it was just John, Rose, and the soon-to-be 2 kids in the house. Michael had brought gifts for John and Rose. He used to come to Ivy's house all the time, but nothing so formal as this. The significance of this visit was extraordinary. He had begun to think of something to take with him when he was at the flat this week, and not forgetting to consult David and Benjamin, the man of the people, he had rushed off to buy the selected things after he had gone out at the end of his work on Friday. The first night before going to the exercises, hearing the news that Ivy had been locked up by Rose, and that night he talked to Rose a great deal. And Aunt Rose, one of your daughters is already unhappy, do you want your other daughter to be unhappy too? If I were you, I would be willing to try to make any of them happy. I didn't do enough to hurt Amelia and July. I promise you that from now on I will treat July well. I am a soldier, I can say that my whole life is surrendered to the country. But I will do my best to be good to July. I am a soldier, I can say that my whole life is surrendered to the country, but I will do my best to be good to you. I'm a soldier, I can say I've surrendered my whole life to the country, but I'll do my best to be good to July. This is something that I gave you today. Michael held something out and put it in front of Rose. It was a real estate license, and I don't know when he'd done the name change. It was already in Ivy's name. I know you don't care about that, and July doesn't care about that, and it's really tacky to take that up, but Aunt Rose, I really don't have any other way of proving that I really mean it, and that's all I've got. Toes for Amelia, Aunt Rose. All I can say is that I'm sorry, I've never liked her or shown her anything. I don't know why she's so paranoid, and all I can do is promise you that July and I will try to minimize our presence in front of her from now on. That Rose was silent, and after a long time, she let out a sigh. You're here today to inform me that you're going to be with July, no matter what. Michael thought for a moment and nodded his head, saying yes. He wasn't supposed to talk to his elders like that, but he had no choice. The girl of his heart was upstairs, only 1 floor away from him, but he, who couldn't even mention to Rose that he wanted to see her. Rose, at least on the face of it, was not furious, and Michael, seeing the good in him, took his leave of Rose, but no one saw how hesitantly he stepped out of Ivy's house. The Rose figured it out later. Not just because of Michael's remark, but because of John's kind words. This man, who has been with Rose for years, has a completely different temperament in front of Rose than he does in the flat, and in a rare moment, he puts on a face in front of Rose and says to her, you think you're doing all this for the good of July, not realizing that you're hurting her all the time. Yes, after July returned from her grandmother, Rose has always felt indebted to this daughter, but do not know how to communicate with her. How to be good to her. Rose will be the best of everything that she felt to her daughter in front of her, yet she is always that faint, so that Rose felt powerless. She tried harder to give all the good things to their little daughter, but it seems that time and time again, against the little daughter herself. True will, otherwise, their mother-daughter relationship would not be the way it is today, right? Rose came to her senses. Let this child go after what she likes for once, as she sees fit, and if she bumps and falls, there's still her mother, who will always stand behind her. And the two had lunch at Ivy's house and then went to Michael's house. Michael had called Mom and Dad ahead of time. All of Michael's family was there for a rare day. Caroline was supposed to have a minor surgery on Saturday. And for the first time in years she irreverently pushed it off, just for the fact that Michael was bringing Ivy home. Caroline took one look at Ivy's arrival and said to her from a distance that July was getting prettier and prettier by the minute. Ivy blushed at Caroline's compliment, and her hands didn't know where to put them. Michael rushed up to relieve himself. Mom, stop teasing July. Since the two of them had already eaten over at Ivy's house, they just sat over here for a while and went out, hand in hand. Caroline quietly watched the backs of those two, and rejoiced in her heart, and said to Thomas, "But we're together now, let's hurry up and get the wedding over with, and don't make any more mistakes," and Thomas nodded approvingly. The marriage report that Michael had typed up earlier had long since been approved, and the political trial, with Thomas and John pressing for it, had passed quickly. Michael was getting busy again these days, and he didn't even have time for the wedding dress fitting he was supposed to go to with Ivy over the weekend. Ivy's mood was a little lower in the end, although she was aware of the nature of his work. Rose's heart is still a little twisted. Naturally it is impossible to accompany Ivy to go. Caroline's side is intent on accompanying her to go, but Ivy think it is not good to bother her mother-in-law. Can only call on Olivia to accompany her a piece of. David had always been stuck with Olivia since I don't know when, but wherever there was Olivia, there was David, and it was David who ended up driving the two of them to the bridal store. David drove all the way, and fought with Olivia the whole way, and Olivia resented him. And you said, you're a big man, and you're not married, so what's the point of going to a bridal store? David, you're so funny. What's the matter? I can't go. I just want to see July in her wedding dress. What's the matter with you? Olivia made a disgusted face. Is it okay for you to look at Sister July in her wedding dress? Sister July is reserved for Michael to look at, and the two men bickered all the way to the door of the bridal store, and David went to park the car. Before they rested, and Ivy believes that she has only Michael in her life. Marriage is a once-in-a-lifetime event for her, and he is the only one in her life, so when choosing her wedding dress, Ivy was extra serious. In their circle, there are a lot of people who pursue luxury. When someone gets married, they specialize in going to France for high fashion, and they go around the world to purchase supplies for the wedding. Ivy's seriousness, but not this kind of wastefulness. She chose her wedding dress with care. She believes that what suits you is the best. She doesn't look at one piece and try it on, as many brides do. She had searched for a long time, and had found a wedding dress of the simplest style. In a sea full of pure white satin texture, sloping shoulders, cinched at the waist, long skirt to the floor, skirt not held up by braces, very plain, and the wedding dress is simple and generous, and fulfills all her aspirations of love. The love should be as pure as this, without so many complicated and gorgeous gestures, but proudly blooming. She'd gone to the fitting room to change, and Olivia had followed her all the way there and insisted on going in with her. Ivy couldn't stand the little heel, and had let Olivia in, just in time to help her straighten her skirt. Ivy and Olivia together from the fitting room, wearing a plain satin wedding dress. The wedding dress will set her skin like snow, like a heavenly being. Even David looked dumbfounded, and after reacting, David's first action was to grab his cell phone and take a picture of the Olivia rushed over and hit him. What are you shooting at? Unfortunately, Olivia wasn't quick enough, and David had already posted the photo of the Michael had just gotten off the practice field when his cell phone vibrated twice. He pulled it out and saw that David had sent him a picture of what appeared to be a woman still in the picture. He didn't click on it to see the larger image, thinking what kind of messed up shit this kid is up to. He was just about to toss his cell phone aside when David sent another comment. Your daughter-in-law is so beautiful. Michael immediately realized something was wrong, and hurriedly clicked that picture open. It was Ivy. She had a plain face, wore a white wedding dress, was beautiful, absolutely gorgeous. And Michael won't even type, he'll just give David a voice back. Delete it, or I'll gouge your eyes out. David over there had only just escaped Olivia's clutches, and immediately received a threatening message from Michael, and the man was all jumping up and down, and immediately dialed Michael's number. Michael, as soon as he answered the phone, there came staggering voice. I said, "Do people cannot be like this? You do not have the time to accompany Ivy to try the wedding dress. I sent the people to the wedding store, after the end of the photo to you to see, you even want to gouge out my eyes. Brother, you are really my brother." David was rambling on and on and on and on. Michael then said on the other side of the phone in a nonchalant tone, "Deleted, I'll come back and buy you dinner." Ivy's side was in front of the mirror looking at the dress to see if it fit, and the clerk kept complimenting her on how pretty and discerning she was. When she heard David's voice, and it seemed to be Michael on the other end of the line, suddenly she felt like the years had passed, and they'd finally broken the ice, and the little ones they'd grown up with were all around, and everything was just fine. And Chapter X. Passionate June in North Africa, and the sun is blazing. Ivy is back in the land of North Africa. She's back this time with a translation assignment. She and David have been assigned as the accompanying interpreters for this meeting between the leaders of the two countries. It's still not that safe here. The local leaders, in order to show their highest respect, came to the airport to receive the plane, which formed a long convoy with local military and police officers driving in front of and behind the convoy. The visiting team also brought its own armed forces, and the Special Assault Brigade of the 60,132nd Regiment was chosen to participate in this escort mission because of their outstanding performance in previous foreign evacuation missions and their many combat experiences in overseas counterterrorism. Ivy, who was traveling with David as an interpreter, sat in the car, her hand casually in her lap, the diamond ring on her ring finger glinting in the sunlight with an otherworldly glow. In this magical land, where they met anew and rejoined together before their marriage, once this job is done, Ivy and Michael will return home for their wedding. Coincidentally, when the two families agreed on the date of the wedding, they did not know about the mission, let alone that Michael, their special commando brigade, would be chosen to undertake the escort. The good thing is that the date of the wedding is a week after the execution of the mission. To visit this mission, there is no conflict, but only suffer the elders of the two families, have to take care of the front and back for them. The Ivy was lost in thought as she thought. David's eyes fell to her bony finger, where the diamond ring shook his eyes. In just 2 short months, Ivy had become someone else's fiancée, and was about to be married, and that's probably what they call not being destined for each other. Suddenly there was a surge of gunfire, and the car in which they were riding was. David tilted his head up, tried to open the window to see what was going on, and he is the son of the minister's family, and his professional skills are strong. Since joining the ministry, he has been stationed abroad in politically stable and relatively developed countries. Where has he seen this kind of situation? Not so with Ivy, who spent 3 years in Afghanistan and has been through gun battles big and small, including the worst one, the evacuation. She reacted by yanking David, squeezing his head under the car seat, and the driver in front of him froze for just a second, and turned to speed up. And Ivy's tone was decisive. "Don't look, it was a gunshot," and she didn't know if she was feeling wrong, but David's head under her hand actually shook twice. "And Ivy, are we gonna die?" David's voice is unsteady. Ivy's heart flashed a flicker of annoyance. This kind of thing really cannot be said, life and death in a split second. However, in order to calm David down, she still firmly said, do not worry about it." Ivy and David had both gotten down. They couldn't see the car's path, but felt it speeding across the North African landscape, taking turns left and right, winding them up to the point where they almost threw up in their mouths. Ivy's fingertips were suddenly hot, and when she looked up, it was David in tears, and he said to Ivy, "I don't have a girlfriend yet, and I don't want to die here." Ivy was amused by him, however she was only amused for a second before her smile froze and 4 thumps came. Their car stalled as if it were a deflated balloon, and they could hear from far away the sound of the car's tires creating great friction with the gravel on the ground, and the sound of opening and closing the door of the car. The Ivy didn't dare to breathe or look up, and, at the same time, hold David down. And outside their window, someone said in French with an African accent, "Get out of the car." Ivy whispered to David in Chinese to stay put and see what happened. The 2 men, along with the driver, were escorted by a group of men outside the car as soon as they opened the door. It was a group of Negroes, all very tall, each with a gun in his hand, and perhaps other weapons, and looking very appalling. Ivy stood fixedly, and heard them muttering whether these two, who were too young to be no way. I think that's it. The group's disorganized discussion gave Ivy a headache, and finally someone spoke to them. Are you the leaders of China, or the ambassadors, or the counselors? The Ivy realized why the group was chasing after their car, though according to their inertia, they must have thought that the more official they were, the more they had to go in front. And it was not coincidental that her and David's car was in front of several leaders and ambassadors and counselors, and these people thought that they were the main people in this meeting, who knew that only 2 interpreters had been captured. Ivy did not speak, and David followed her example of not speaking, and the driver, who had driven for years in the ministry, and was an old-fashioned one, likewise did not speak. A group of local anti-government armed men scratched their heads but couldn't do anything about it, with such a large group of people surrounding them. Ivy was actually scared in her heart, but she believed that once the caravan side had set up the melee and realized that their car was missing, they would definitely send someone to look for them. The Ivy didn't know if the local military and police could be trusted, but trusted Michael and his handlers 100%. A group of blacks, and they dilly-dally for a while. Seeing that nothing can be asked, the leader of the man said, "Take away, no matter what he is, an official or not, captured as a hostage," and after the end of the whistle to the side of the person, "The woman looks not bad." Alarm bells went off in Ivy's mind, wondering where these men were taking them, and even more so, wondering what kind of danger he was putting her in with his words just now. She, David, and the driver had their hands held behind their backs, and were each being escorted to the car by a Negro. At that very moment, there was the sudden sound of someone falling to the ground. One of the anti-government forces was shot and fell upright. The black guy in charge asked in French, "Who?" The other, of course, would not answer him, and he did not expect him to. The Negro raised his eyes and looked around. There was a vast desert all around, no sign of anyone, and the gun was silenced just now. He couldn't even find where the bullet had come from, and the corner of Ivy's mouth quirked up. It must be Michael coming. She suddenly wasn't nervous at all. The members of the anti-government forces were on high alert and had their guns loaded, and the 3 of them who were holding them down had their guns pressed directly against the backs of their heads. Michael, hidden in the shadows, his eyes nourishing sparks, the bastards that looking at Ivy, who had a gun pointed at her head but was still proudly holding her head up. Michael's heart throbbed, and he didn't dare to think about what he'd do if something happened to Ivy. The accidents on this mission seemed to catch him off guard and make him feel more difficult than on any of his previous missions. He couldn't let Ivy get hurt 1 iota. And at the same time, he had to save the other 2. He asked Liam, the sniper lying beside him, which of the 3 would be best to tackle. Liam didn't hesitate, the one behind his sister-in-law. He thought about it, and then he thought, no, it's actually all well and good. Once the one behind his sister-in-law is sorted out, the other 2 will be quick. Michael nodded. I'll take Lucas and a few of the others. We'll flank them from the back and take out the other ones in the back. You take care of the 3 that are holding the hostages, and make sure nothing goes wrong. Liam nodded. That was the apple of their captain's eye. There was another sound of falling to the ground, and Ivy felt the force behind her that had been holding her back suddenly disappear. She turned and snatched the gun out of the fallen body's hand as fast as she could. The leader of the anti-government forces raised his gun and was about to shoot Ivy. Bang of a gunshot, fell to the ground, but not Ivy, but just raised the gun on Ivy. That person, standing behind that person, actually is Michael. With his bang several shots, has been one after another to solve 4 or 5 people. The Ivy's eyes were welling up with tears, and it's Michael. It's still him, and he's able to show up on time, as if from heaven. Every time she's in crisis, another man went down under the bullets of a silenced gun, and the driver was freed of the without their leader. The anti-government militants were in disarray and tried to tear up the tickets, but they couldn't even get to Ivy and the driver in time before they were taken care of by Michael, Lucas, and others, who were flanking them from behind. Only David was left, still being controlled by a black man, surrounded by 3 or 4 black men. Liam was very good at long-range sniping and had no problem at all in taking care of the man behind David. Michael and the others could quickly take care of the people around them at close range as well, but out of nowhere, the cover on top of Liam's sniper scope fell off, reflecting an extremely blinding Bright light in the desert, the anti-government armed men shouted in French, there, he's there. They found the exact location of the sniper. Ivy yelled. Run! Liam had quick reflexes and knew that Ivy was calling out to him, and he had to take a black cloth as a temporary substitute for cover to wrap the gun up and quickly move away from it. This sudden situation caused all the officers and soldiers who rushed to their rescue to break out in a cold sweat. All of them were exposed to the sight of anti-government armed personnel and were in a face-to-face situation with the anti-government armed forces. Nowadays, the only thing that fights is speed and accuracy, and there's a frenzy of gunfire coming from the desert. That Ivy and the driver were yanked aside behind a rock by a member of the special brigade in the midst of the gunfire, bullets whizzing behind them. The nearest nearly hitting Ivy in the heel of her foot. The Ivy, gasping for breath, slumped behind a rock and tried to look up to see what was going on in front of her, but the team member held her down. Sister-in-law, I'm begging you, please, save Michael's ass. Seeing that Michael was on the verge of going crazy for this girlfriend, several times over, they couldn't stand to watch when he said that. Ivy didn't move, and crouched there like a good cat, and David's voice came from over there, hoarse, help me. I don't want to die. The gunfire died down, and the member of the team who had held Ivy down stuck his head out from behind the rock, and made sure it was all set up, before letting Ivy and the driver out of the room. Ivy saw Michael standing there, and there was blood on him, and she didn't know if it was his or someone else's. He had been covered with wounds in the gunfight just now, but as long as he stood there, he gave a boundless solidity to the Ivy ran toward Michael, trying to jump into his arms. However, her pupils suddenly tightened. The man who had just fallen behind Michael, at some point half sitting up, raised the gun in his hand and pointed it at Michael's back. The Ivy screamed, followed by the sound of bullets passing through flesh. The whistling of a long desert wind. That a buzz went through her brain. And what happened? Ivy felt like she was losing her memory. It's amazing how quickly she loaded her gun, pulled the trigger on the man behind Michael, and fired, in that moment just now. The whole time, without the slightest hesitation, she killed a man. Bewildered, Ivy dropped the gun in her hand, unsure of what to do, and Michael came over with a few big steps, and hugged her fiercely. Don't be afraid, July, don't be afraid, you're not at fault. If it hadn't been for you just now, maybe, I wouldn't be able to stand here any longer. The Ivy crouched in Michael's arms, tears pouring down her face. Not sure if it was from the gratitude of the aftermath or from the fear of having killed someone for the first time. Michael wrapped Ivy in his arms, patted her back. And July, I'm so happy that all those things that were taught to you, that you still remember and can use to keep yourself safe, and, even, to protect me. The words felt like they touched Ivy's heart, and she completely ignored them, hugging him and letting out a sob. It's okay. Everything's okay. They're all safe. Michael and the others didn't drive up due to the operation, and the few remaining cars were damaged in the shooting, so they had to go back on foot. Walking over to the car they had just been in, Ivy saw something and suddenly stopped crying, and she crouched down and pulled out a flag in the mud and sand, the flag that had just been planted on the front of the car, and had somehow ended up in the sand. Holding the flag, Ivy asked Michael with a melting smile in her eyes. Xiaoshuan brother, do you know what I was thinking when I was kidnapped? I was thinking, with you, with the motherland behind us, I'm not afraid of anything. Michael held Ivy tightly in his arms. The wind blew in the desert, and the little red flag fluttered in the wind, and she gathered it up carefully and carried it with her. The ministry didn't bring any other interpreters with them this time, but it was possible to find someone from the local embassy who could fill in, and ambassador who. The counselor who had been promoted to the rank of counselor during the evacuation of the overseas Chinese that year, consulted with Ivy and David, asking them if they needed to take a break, and if they could continue to be capable of interpreting for the entourage this time around. Ivy said yes. David said yes. The two continued to work seamlessly together, successfully completing 3 days of accompanying translations. After the work was done, David pleaded with Ivy, you can't go back and tell your co-workers about me, or else you won't be able to make it. Ivy pursed her lips and smiled, relieved not to say that the WHO is not afraid of death, but because of the attachment and faith in the heart. To be able to put life and death at risk again and again. On the plane back to China, the leaders of the ministry are gossiping. Ivy, the one who brought you back a few days ago, is your fiancé. I heard that the last time the evacuation of foreigners was also him. The Ivy nodded her head and said proudly, I was buried during the earthquake, and he saved me. To the leader tisk tisk tisked. You two are really meant for each other. It's June in Washington, D.C., and it's that time of year again when the trees are full of flowers and the leaves are in full bloom. Ivy and Michael's wedding took place on such an early summer day. Their wedding banquet was held very low-key. Wedding photos did not have time to shoot. The banquet invited only their friends and a few colleagues, as well as in the way of the relationship between the two parents had to invite some people. Ivy's grandmother lived in England for many years, long time not come back to Washington, but this time also for Ivy's wedding came back. But also will be their own young accompanied the leader of the visit to Burma when a pair of jade bracelets to give Ivy. Back then, even when Rose got married, the old man did not give it. The old man is not willing to give it. Amelia cried out a few days before their wedding, packed up her belongings and started a new trip. That the wedding scene, Ivy wearing a plain satin wedding dress slowly walked toward Michael. Emma, as a little flower girl, holding flowers, followed the bride Ivy's side. Michael in a military uniform, straight posture, waiting for his bride. The moment Ivy walked toward Michael, it was like Michael saw a fairy in the sky. This girl he'd longed for, the girl his heart had longed for, the girl he'd grown up with, the girl he'd lived through life and death with, had finally come to him, and they'll grow old together and never be apart. A cadre of elders were all happy. They had been looking forward to this day for a long time. Who wouldn't wish them well? And Rose's face also showed a light smile that hadn't been seen for a long time. They were happy. That was good. She couldn't let her two daughters be unhappy. She felt that she owed Ivy in her heart, but she didn't know how to make up for it. That little bit of shortcoming finally disappeared. The big screen at the wedding venue suddenly started playing their pictures. And both Ivy and Michael were stunned that they hadn't known about this beforehand. It turned out to be the idea of Andrew, David, and a few of them to collect all the photos of them from childhood to adulthood in one piece, a memory between the two, and witnessed the growth of the two, the picture by picture. The past is fresh in my mind, from the time they were children of 5 or 6 years old, to their youthful doula years, to their adulthood. The last photo is framed in the sprawling deserts of the North African land, and I don't know who took it, but I don't know who took it. In the photo, Ivy's face is a little tear-stained, but with a smile on it, and she's holding a flag, waving it at him, and Michael is looking at her with a smile on his face. How many trials and tribulations, how long a distance they had to travel to get to each other, probably many, many, many more. But he loved her, and she loved him, and then no matter how much more, they'd still find each other.